I've got a FOIA document dated 1970. It's a memo from Hoover to field programs, 1970, where somebody had proposed that they send a memo to Huey Newton saying that David Hilliard, Black Panther Party members, had stolen some money and put it in a bank account overseas to split them up. And one of the field officers wrote back and said, gee, boss, that's a pretty good idea, but we don't have anything to prove that, so we can't do it. Hoover wrote back, quote, the purpose of counterintelligence action is to disrupt the Black Panther Party, and it's immaterial where the facts exist to substantiate the charge. If the facts are present, it aids in the success of proposal, but the Bureau feels that skimming of money is such a sensitive issue that disruption can be accomplished without facts to back it up. There's also similar documents that show they try to create assassinations within the group. Punchline here, there's nothing they won't do. And I really appreciate the emphasis you all made earlier about us being ready and prepare our friends who may not be as politically versed as we are in realizing there will be lies and distortions about how terrible you are. When you're not, you're the very kind, big-hearted people that we all are that care enough to stand up and resist. One of the actions that I know particularly about is the efforts by the alcohol, tobacco, and let me go back one. 1976, there's been all that stuff. You got the anti-war movement. You got a lot of stuff happening. Watergate. The U.S. Senate has intelligence activities and the rights of Americans, an investigation. There are volumes that probably are this wide. Here's the final report. Bear with me with one sentence that says, if I can memorize it. Our nation has acted at times inconsistent with a democracy and at times reminiscent of totalitarian regimes. That's the U.S. Senate. Think about it. They never say anything like that today. For Democrats, the report put on the shelf, done away with, and by 1979, here in Greensboro, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, along with the FBI, put a full-time agent inside the Nazi Party. The Greensboro Police Department puts a paid informant inside the Ku Klux Klan. They galvanize them together in literally a united racist front. They drive into Greensboro, a planned anti-Klan march is gathering, with a police car with a photographer following behind the cars for 30 minutes in photographs, as do 4 TV stations, while they pull out guns, rifles, sticks, and murder 5 wonderful labor organizers, many of whom were communists, part of the Workers' Viewpoint Organization. One had been a professor at the med school here. One had graduated from Harvard Divinity School. I get the chill bumps on my arms as I talk about that right now. They're gunned down in the street in front of TV cameras. And a state jury with state prosecutors with collusion by a state judge conceal that, because if you know all that about the pre-planning and the meetings where the informants reported that the bad guys were coming to kill the communists and they did nothing to protect it, then there's a federal prosecution. Only a federal prosecution because the people rallied and petitioned and held meetings like this and showed the videotapes of the people being gunned down. All white jury, state trial, federal trial, total acquittal. Total acquittal. So that's how bad it can get. People can be murdered. Wrap up. Some implications. We can't be frightened. We cannot be chilled. This is such a propitious moment, man. Everybody's in motion because most everybody's being affected. Even in the ritzy #1, our country, the middle class, are being moved. Now they moved toward the Tea Party, but we've got the classic moment of 2 roads. It's either fascism, some version of fascism, which maybe we're already facing that, or some version of socialism, democratic socialism, where you have a democratic elected body that has the power to regulate and control these run-amok corporations that want to divide up the world for resources. So I encourage that we step up our direct action, that we use all forms of protest. Some people are better at writing the letters because that's where they want to go. Some of us would rather be in the streets getting arrested. We need to do that stuff. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Next, we're going to hear from Teresa Elamine, who's a regional organizer for the Durham-based Southern Anti-Racism Network. Teresa is also a steering committee co-chair of the Green Party of the United States. She began her activism with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1965, and she has resided in Columbus, Georgia since December of 2010. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here representing the Green Party of the United States, the National Steering Committee, and the National Committee. I represent the National Women's Caucus on the National Committee, so I'm very conscious of the fact that so many women have been caught up in the FBI raids. And what I want to wish for all of us today, that we would leave this conference with a clarity, as Louis was pointing out, of why the FBI does this and how they do it. Because I think we have to understand how they do it so that we don't let that stop us from building the movements that we're building. We have to build a movement in solidarity with all the activists who are caught up in this witch hunt. But we also have to continue to build the movements that they've been building and not let it stop us, because the whole goal of this, the why, is to disrupt the movements, to throw people off balance, to keep them from doing the work that they've been doing. And this has a very, very long history. The part of the history that I'm most familiar with is the Black Liberation Movement, because in that classroom, a very small classroom at Tuskegee, when Stokely Carmichael said to the students in the classroom, "I'm with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and I'm for Black Power, will you join us?" And we all raised our hands that day in the classroom. And little did we know that all around us, there were these attacks on the movement, and there was all of this surveillance on the movement from so many different corners. Because surveillance is what the Federal Bureau of Investigation does. They send spies, they send infiltrators into movements to disrupt them. It was wrong for Attorney General Ramsey Clark to approve the surveillance of Martin Luther King Jr. just as much as it is wrong for Eric Holder to approve the surveillance of anti-war activists today. So please understand the message that came from Steph, and is it Madeline? Meredith, that this will happen at the highest levels of the Justice Department. There are three features of the Black Liberation Movement that are important to note. It was organizations all fighting against racism. It was revolutionary consciousness in that movement in the 60s and charismatic leaders. State repression and the fragmentation that followed that is something that we're still struggling with today. How do we get over that fragmentation that was caused by the disruptions that Louis spoke about? Sending notes back and forth between people, having all kinds of agents inside of the movement. I remember sitting in the SNCC office one night as a volunteer. It was my job to go to the door and see who was at the door. And Stokely Carmichael, Julian Bond, and other people were sitting there having a meeting about Julian Bond's special election campaign. And I went to the door, and it was somebody that I knew from Lowndes County in Tuskegee, and I shouted back up, "It's Jesse." And Stokely said, "Don't open that door, he's an agent." And it was this kind of activity that was created. And I kept thinking to myself, how could he be? I knew him when we were working together. But that is how it happens. And so when we understand the why and we understand the how, then we know that we can stop it. And we couldn't be doing this at no better time, because what happened in Egypt says a lot for what is possible. So if we are in a revolutionary movement for North Africa in particular and the Middle East and what is going on there, it is really shaken the very fabric of U.S. imperialism, because all of the friends of U.S. imperialism that are in power in that region now are being challenged. So this could happen. Because I was at a meeting in Durham Thursday evening, and it was about waiting for Superman and the whole problem with the school system and the racism and all the resegregation of the schools. And someone shouted from the audience, "Look at what happened in Egypt. We can do this here." So Egypt is everywhere, and we should not lose this moment as they rally across the region against imperialism, because it is our job to stand up against imperialism. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in a few years will celebrate its 100th anniversary. There have always been movements against U.S. imperialism, and we won't stop now. We won't let them disrupt us. This is just a moment, a little blip on the screen. But we are clear that we are never going to stop. And I hope that we leave here today with the inspiration and the courage to know that no matter what happens, when they knock on our door, we will do what Meredith and Steph did. We won't give them any information, let them take all our files. We know now that we need to have duplicates of our files. we know that now, right? So we know that we would never be in a position again where they can take everything that allows us to build a movement. So I think this moment is the best moment possibly for us in the movement against imperialism, because there is motion throughout the world against U.S. imperialism, and they are running rapidly to try to figure out how they can stop everything inside this country and in those other places. They are so disorganized at this point, quite frankly, they can't figure out why, but they think watching us and looking at us and seeing what we do, what we think, it's important to know what makes activists think the way they do. That's the information that they collect. That's why your books, what you read, who you talk to is so important, because they have been studying us for years to understand how do we build movements so that they can stop them. That's why they do it. And so we have to study them to understand war, the war on us and the wars abroad, so that we can continue to stop them. That's the job that we have, and I look forward to us discussing the strategies and tactics we'll be using to continue to build a movement while we fight for our activists who have been caught up in this FBI repression. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. So next we have Afia Wangaza, who's a lifelong civil and human rights activist and freedom fighter whose commitment began as a child in her Garveyite parents' Apostolic Faith Church in Norfolk, Virginia. She's the former co-chair of the Jericho Movement for U.S. Political Prisoners and